G'day, it's Jamie, and welcome to Tantanoola Tigers. Today, I'm reading a couple of old newspaper reports about a black panther or Thylacoleo shooting at Horse Stealers Gully near Inverell, New South Wales in 1902. So we'll get into it. This was published in the Inverell Times on Friday, the 5th of June 1936, titled Old Time Episode, Panther Shot, Skin at Times Office. Some time ago, reference was made in these columns to a panther having been shot in the wild Big River country many years ago, which gave rise to many incredulous comments. Mr. Harry Leader has now left at this office a skin of a panther shot by his brother in 1902. Mr. Leader, in an interview, gives full particulars of the incident, and his narrative is undoubtedly accurate and credible. He states that during the big drought of 1902, he and his brothers, Jack and Charlie, were camped on Horse Stealers Gully, a few miles from the Guyder River and easterly of Kira. They were in charge of stock there and had cut a pathway from the inland through the gorge to enable the stock to get to the river for water. This path naturally became very dusty. The party frequently saw large tracks in the dust and at other places, which caused much interest as it was difficult to account for them being far too large for any dog. However, the doubt was soon put at rest, for one evening about 8:30, Charlie was returning along the track to camp when he heard a blood-curdling roar quite near him in the scrub. He watched for a few moments and threw a stone or two, but as nothing happened, he walked on to camp. Feeling properly alarmed, the camp was about 2 miles from the spot, and on arriving there, he told his brothers of his experience and turned to have a wash. At that moment, they heard a great sniff. Charlie heard it too, and picked up his rifle as he sat on a log before the fire. The animal then appeared in the firelight for a moment, and all hands had a good sight of it before it disappeared into the scrub. Harry Leader threw some bushes on the fire, which caused it to flare up, and at that moment the animal reappeared and went off to make off along the track away from the camp. Charlie immediately fired at the creature, which emitted another tremendous roar, rushed away about 50 yards, and then fell dead. The party immediately examined it and found it to be some animal strange to the Australian bush. Next morning they skinned it, and a few months later sent the skin to Sydney to be tanned. At the same time, asking the tanner to ascertain what the creature was. In reply, the tanner said it was a panther. The party followed the tracks of the panther along the path and ascertained that it had probably followed Charlie to the camp the night before, but fortunately had not dared to attack him. For some nights afterwards, the party heard what they took to be the mother calling to its young. Jack Leader saw what he took to be the mother once after the shooting, but it disappeared into the scrub. About a month after the shooting, Harry saw the creature quite distinctly by the light of the campfire, but he could not shoot as it was in direct line with where his horse was standing. It immediately jumped away and disappeared. A little dog rushed the animal, but returned greatly scared. Before all this, the party and an old bushman, Jerry Baldwin, had frequently seen skins of sheep turned inside out, with the whole of their carcass eaten, except the head. Even the tongue had not been touched, and they were quite at a loss to account for the phenomenon, it being quite contrary to the habits of any known bush animal. Some months after the shooting, a dingo trapper lost a big trap, and he followed the tracks for some distance, occasionally seeing unusually large footprints, like a dog's but too large for any dingo. However, he lost the tracks in the rough country. Some 4 years later, the trap was found attached to a carcass of very large bones. This was held to account for the disappearance of the mother panther. It was reported in the district about the time of the shooting that a panther had escaped from a travelling circus while it was located at Old Bogomildy, and this would account for the presence of the creature in the bush, while the other animal was its cub born after its escape. Mr. Leader has left the panther skin in this office for a while to enable anyone interested to inspect it and as a guarantee of the truth of his story, which seems reasonable enough under the circumstances, explaining the presence of the panther in the locality. According to Webster's dictionary, a panther is a large dark-coloured variety of the leopard, marked with large ring-marked spots, the centres of which are darker than the colour of the body. The skin under notice hardly corresponds to this description, though the time which has elapsed may account for the fact therein. Okay, so this final story was also published in the Inverell Times on Friday, the 19th of June, 1936, titled, "The Panther, More Evidence, Other Incidences." Mr. Harry Leader called at this office during the week and asserted that he was not the one to put fairy tales over people as he had been accused by critics. He points out that he did not decide that the strange animal was a panther. He asked an independent person in Sydney to give it a name. All that Mr. Leader is sure of is that it was no Australian animal. He does not recollect any stranger coming about the camp after the animal was shot to examine it, but knows that strangers may have been about his camp and was ratted on more than one occasion. He says that Mr. Smith was not in the district at the time. Referring to the dingo trap, which was taken away by Mrs. W.M. and Alf Austin, followed the tracks for a few days and saw that the trap had occasionally been caught in a sapling and the animal dragging it had chewed the bark of the sapling in efforts to release itself. The tracks eventually disappeared in the scrub. Mr. Hobday informs us that he remembered seeing the skin a few days after it was secured, and whatever it was taken from, it certainly was no bullpup as alleged, nor was from any Australian animal he knew. Mr. Hobday recounted how some practical joker had attached the skin of a large kangaroo to a steer, fitting the kangaroo's head and tail to the steer and letting it go bush. He said the animal caused quite a scare to anyone who saw it, and they did not realise what it was. The animal soon died, however, probably from restiveness owing to continuous fright. The end. Wow, this is really interesting, this. So Charlie and Harry and Jack Leader are herding cattle at Horse Stealers Gully, and they frequently saw large tracks too big to be any dog. And then one evening, Charlie's coming back to camp, and he's heard a blood-curdling roar, and so he's made it back to camp. And when he got back to camp, he heard a great sniff, and then the animal appeared in the firelight, and they all got a good sight of it. And so then Harry threw some more bushes on the fire, which caused it to flare up, and the animal reappeared. So Charlie shot at it, and it ran away about 50 yards and then died. And then the next morning they skinned it and sent it to Sydney, and the tanner was the one that said it was a panther. None of the Leader brothers said it was a panther. And then from nights afterwards, after that, they kept hearing what they thought to be the mother calling its young. So they're assuming that what they shot was a young panther and its mother was still out there. And then Jack Leader said that he saw the mother once after the shooting, but it disappeared into the scrub. And then about a month after the shooting, Harry saw the creature by the campfire night, but he couldn't shoot because his horse was in the way, and his little dog rushed at it, but it came back scared. And then before all this, a bushman named Jerry Baldwin had frequently seen skins of sheep turned inside out, and the whole carcass is eating, except the head and tongue. And then some months after the shooting, a dingo trapper lost a big track, and it dragged it off for some distance, and they had unusually large footprints, like a dog's, but too large for any dingo. And then 4 years later, the trap was found attached to a carcass of very large bones. It's really interesting. And then people reckon that it wasn't a panther, And this one guy, Mr. Smith, wrote several letters to the newspaper, which I didn't include in this story, where he kept saying it wasn't a panther, it was just a big bull Arab dog. But the classic was Mr. Smith wasn't in the area where the skin was. He was out of town at the time. And I reckon Mr. Smith just had a beef with the Leader brothers and just wanted to make them look stupid in the newspaper. It's really interesting. I'd love to know whether it was a black panther or was it a Thylacoleo, because the guy that had the skin at the office said that the skin didn't look like what the Webster's Dictionary description was. So it's really interesting whether they've shot a black panther or they shot a Thylacoleo. And I'd love to know what happened to this skin eventually. Okay, that's it from me. I'll get back to you all next time. Bye.